This podcast is made possible by listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's January 13th, 2025, and on this day in 1812, the storied willingness of Tennesseans to volunteer for their nation's cause had a little hiccup. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. In the last year, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has sent a couple of all-volunteer waves to the Mexican border to support the Texas governor in his fight against the federal government over border policy. And right now, it seems as though Lee is preparing to double down on offering Tennessee assistance to the cause, with a pledge to aid the Trump administration in whatever it chooses to do in, as they put it, securing the borders, all of which is putting a modern spin on the state's long-standing reputation for pitching in. And it is a long-standing reputation indeed. See, the reason Tennessee is the volunteer state and that the UT sports teams are called the Vols is that in the days before the nation had a standing army and pretty much every engagement involved rounding up willing participants, this state was particularly full of willing guys. And that started back in the days when Andrew Jackson was leading all kinds of movements against Native American groups farther south of us and in the War of 1812 against the British. That war is when the state got the nickname. Governor Willie Blount put out a call for volunteer soldiers, and right away, nearly 1,500 Tennesseans answered, forming up in Nashville to go to the front lines with Jackson. These are the folks, pretty much, who would end up with him in the storied Battle of New Orleans, which is its own podcast episode one of these days. Anyway, at the start of all that effort is when that little hiccup happened, the one I referenced at the very start of this episode. The group left Nashville on the Cumberland River in 13 boats. They arrived in Clarksville around 6 p.m. on January 13th, and Jackson stopped to stock up on supplies for all of these men. Up until this point, the prevailing attitude that Jackson had encountered was, everyone in Tennessee is all in on this war effort. We're all doing our part. The volunteer spirit, right? It was analogous to the stuff you see from World War II, when women were giving up their silk stockings so the materials could be used to make parachutes, and folks were growing veggies in victory gardens so the usual stream of produce could go to the troops instead. That was the vibe the whole time Blount was going around raising support and rounding up troops. And just look at how many guys had shown up. Tennessee was in it. Well, Jackson ordered 160 barrels of flour for his troops. The response from folks in Clarksville was, "Oh, sorry, we don't really have that much in our warehouse. We don't even have half that much, but we can give you 60. He did not believe them. At this point, Clarksville was a thriving mid-state community, second only to Nashville in size and importance, and it was an important river port where farmers could bring their goods to market. Jackson sent out armed troops to search and see what was being held back, or, as it was put at the time, he sent out the bayonet to bring it in. And sure enough, the search produced enough flour to supply the 1st Regiment. The group moved on 2 days later, leaving a colonel behind to find another 70 barrels. From Jackson's perspective, the people of Clarksville were not being good volunteers. They weren't doing their part for that Tennessee army. He wasn't trying to commandeer the flour. He was paying for it. So why wouldn't they give him all they had? The local merchants just saw that they were getting cleared out of all their inventory. Sure, it was fine and good to help the army. That's why they'd agreed at first to sell a significant amount, 60 full barrels. But their regular customers were going to be coming by expecting flour for purchase too, which is why they ended up raising the price of what the army forced them to hand over, charging $8 a barrel when the going rate was less than $6. Tennessee would continue to reinforce its reputation as a volunteer state during the War of 1812. Blount sought out to sign up 3,500 troops, but by war's end, there were almost 28,000 Tennesseans in uniform. And the state answered the call in a pretty major way in the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, all the way up to today. It's never been totally straightforward, though. Cute nicknames gloss over the complications that have always accompanied the state's willingness to put people on front lines of whatever kind of engagement the country's involved in. And it becomes especially thorny when it's not a clear-cut war, or an effort that the nation as a whole is willing to get behind. We don't yet know for sure just exactly what scope of assistance Governor Lee is promising the Trump White House. Last week, he did confirm that he's ready and willing to deploy the National Guard for the purpose of deporting undocumented immigrants, if that's what Trump asks him to do. And in an earlier letter, he pledged to offer what seems to be more wide-ranging kind of help, suggesting broadly that Tennessee agencies and personnel would be made available to help carry out border policy. In an alternate history where volunteer hadn't presented itself as a natural choice for UT mascot, perhaps they would have become the Hellbenders instead. It's just as appropriate since the massive salamanders are native to East Tennessee. And in just a few minutes, a look at why the eastern Hellbender may soon be added to the endangered species list. That's coming up after the newscast.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Miriam and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Middle Tennessee is beginning to open back up after Friday's snowstorm blanketed the state. In Nashville, WeGo Public Transit returned to its normal schedule yesterday morning after scaling back Friday and Saturday. Trash collection resumes today, though Metro government is asking residents to hold off on putting out recycling bins until their next scheduled recycling pickup day. Yesterday, several Middle Tennessee school districts announced plans for Monday classes. Some are reopening on a 2-hour delay. Others will remain closed, including Dixon, Murray, Robertson, Rutherford, and Wilson County schools. Metro Nashville Public Schools has not announced any deviation from the normal schedule as of the time of this recording. Most of Middle Tennessee received between 3 and 4 inches of snow, but some saw even more than that. Pegram and Mount Juliet saw 5 inches, and Southwest Dixon County got nearly 6. Some of Davidson's surrounding counties are being more cautious about reopening. Williamson County closed all parks and waste drop-off facilities yesterday. Power outages have been minor and mostly in West Tennessee. Only one water system was affected, Lexington in Henderson County. The snowstorm had a deadly impact on Tennessee highways and interstates. Major Travis Plotzer with the Tennessee Highway Patrol posted a social media video about the challenges and warned people to avoid driving during winter storms.
Troopers have had to respond to over 500 crashes where people were not injured. They've also had to respond to over 120 crashes where people were injured. Tragically, we've also had to respond to 3 crashes with fatalities. Troopers were able to assist over 870 people that were broken down or stranded on Tennessee highways.
Plotzer says THP dispatchers answered more than 1,700 phone calls related to the storm since Friday. Tennessee lawmakers will be back in Nashville tomorrow for the 114th General Assembly. WPLN's Mariana Bacallao reports on the key issues going into this legislative session.
The governor's school voucher program didn't have the votes last year, but it's front and center this year. The first bill filed in the House would allow parents across the state to use public school dollars for private school tuition. Students currently enrolled in the pilot program have underperformed on state testing compared to their public school peers. But Governor Bill Lee says that parents participating have a 99% satisfaction rate.
What's most important to me is that the taxpayer gets the opportunity to determine where their taxpayer dollars are spent. This is not the government's money, it's taxpayers' money.
Also top of mind are the 13 Tennessee counties still recovering from the damage of Hurricane Helene. There's been talk of disaster relief, but so far few bills filed address the need for aid. Meanwhile, a semi-bipartisan effort to end the grocery tax is underway, with some disagreement on how to recoup those funds. Democrats have proposed using a corporate tax, but Republicans haven't offered an alternative. Mariana Bacallao, WPLN News.
As Governor Billy again pushes to expand school vouchers, he is resurfacing a favorite anecdote about the transformative power of charter schools. But the Tennessee Journal finds the governor is unwilling to fill in some blanks about the boy in the story. The governor has described meeting a boy named Adam in a program for at-risk youth and seeing how a charter school transformed his life for the better. The Journal reports that more recently, as a young adult, that man has battled personal problems that make for a more complicated story, and that the governor declined to discuss what he referred to as the man's private life. The governor has pushed for a statewide voucher program that would give families of all income levels about $7,000 per student to use for private schools. Leadership is considering a legislative special session on the policy. Gunfire continues to kill more Tennessee kids than car accidents. That's according to a new report from the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. It takes some time for full data sets to be compiled, so the study looks at the figures for 2022. In that year, the study finds the rate of child and teen deaths was only a little lower than in the previous year and higher than any other year in the previous decade. The state is also outpacing the national average. 1 in 5 deaths of minors involved a firearm in Tennessee. The state had the nation's 17th highest rate of unintentional deaths. But when it comes to homicides of children and teens, the state has the 10th highest rate in the country. City leaders in Knoxville are giving the go-ahead to the same kind of police surveillance program that Nashville recently backed away from. Knoxville City Council last week approved a contract for operating surveillance cameras around the city and software that lets private camera owners share their video feed with police. The News Sentinel reports the council chambers were packed with demonstrators who voiced concerns about privacy and over-policing and questioned the racial impacts of surveillance. Similar concerns led Metro Council to cancel its contract for the Fusus surveillance software last month. The One Small Step initiative from StoryCorps pairs two people on opposite sides of the political spectrum for a 1-hour conversation about anything but politics. The goal is to hear about each other's backgrounds and maybe find out they're not as different as they think. Jad Abumrad, creator of the NPR show Radio Lab and now a professor at Vanderbilt University, is bringing One Small Step to the Vanderbilt campus. The program is currently open to university staff, community members, and students. Abumrad tells our Daily Show This is Nashville he hopes to reach across divides like race, religion, and class.
Vanderbilt has the most scholarships of any higher ed institution, and also the most top 1%ers of any. Huge class differences in the student body that I hope we can use this program to explore.
Abumrad says the program will eventually be open to people across Tennessee. Southern California residents are facing weather extremes that could not be more different from the snow blanketing the Mid-South this weekend. Dry and windy conditions have made way for multiple wildfires in the LA area. That's home to a significant number of entertainment industry professionals. Music Cares, the nonprofit arm of the Recording Academy that also has offices in Nashville, is extending aid to displaced people who make their living from music. The offer of short-term relief includes financial assistance for relocation, instrument replacement, and other needs. The organization will also focus on long-term support. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has proposed listing the eastern hellbender salamander as endangered. It's a species that gets special attention locally through the breeding efforts of the Nashville Zoo. At West Virginia Public Broadcasting, environmental reporter Curtis Tate spoke with Thun Hitt, senior scientist at the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, about what threatens the hellbender across Appalachia and in Tennessee.
I read that sedimentation is one of the main threats to the hellbender. What are some others?
They're facing challenges due to climate change. They're facing challenges due to disease. And these things are complicated because they're often interwoven. For example, they require large, flat rocks for nesting. And those are features, and also the juveniles require those features to survive. No, sedimentation literally buries their home. And so sedimentation literally buries their home. We also know that they stop feeding efficiently at high temperatures. So as temperatures warm past a threshold, roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, as you warm above that threshold, they stop feeding, and so growth is impaired, and that's also, a stressor. Also, of course, droughts and floods can be extremely important. In the last year, we've seen both sides of it. We've seen extreme drought, we've seen extreme flooding. Both sides of that can be stressors and threats to hellbenders, because on the drought side, if we lose stream water, temperatures often can increase, and that can be stressful. And also they can just lose habitat. On the flood side, anything that's going to flip large rocks or features in the stream can scour out their habitats, and that can be obviously lethal, especially for juveniles. So extreme weather from climate change is also very much a risk.
What about diseases?
We also know that in some cases, disease, a chytrid fungus, can impair populations and can cause mortalities. And it's interesting that those disease effects are often coupled with temperature. So as temperature goes up, other factors become more lethal. So that's an important piece of the puzzle too. So these things often interact, but yes, there are many stressors, but it starts with sedimentation.
Where is the sediment coming from?
Any land surface, any surface disturbance that moves sediment down slope can have those effects. Also, water quality can be important, and they breathe through their skin as adults, so they're an extremely important indicator species. Hellbenders are very secretive creatures, but the science is very clear. They only live in cold, clean streams. That's the only place you'll find them. So if you find that the hellbenders in a stream, you know that ecosystem is intact. And we do see some disturbing trends. We see that, it's estimated that about 80% of their historic range has been lost across the 15 states where hellbenders, currently persist. But keep in mind, they have been here for millions of years. It's amazing. We're looking at a living fossil. And if they can persist through all the change that millions of years has brought, it should give us pause that we see significant declines over recent decades, due to land disturbance, movement of soils, climate change, and disease.
Is there a way for folks to tell the Department of Natural Resources if they encounter one?
No agency has enough resources by themselves to go and do these surveys that are necessary. It has to be involved. The public has to be involved, and the public really is stepping up for this. It's important. Sometimes anglers will, catch a hellbender on their line. This is the largest salamander in North America. It's amazing to see, and so people often are confused. Like, what is this thing? Sometimes they're misidentified as mud puppies, a similar species, but they occupy more sort of slack water environments. They're usually smaller. They have gills. It's sort of different looking, but somewhat similar. But anglers sometimes will catch a hellbender by mistake. The best thing to do is clip that hook, safely remove the hook, release the animal, and then let DNR know, because they're so secretive and elusive that having citizen scientists and anglers get involved in the surveying, and it really does help understand their true status.
Assuming they are listed as endangered, what does it mean? What does it change?
That's a good question. It means that there may be more motivation to fund conservation and to develop the programs and partnerships that are necessary to protect the species. It would involve understanding what habitats are critical and developing conservation plans for recovery. That's the main thing that a listing would do. It would start a process of recovery, and that's really what it's all about.
A big thanks to our colleagues in West Virginia for sharing that story about an animal with a range that includes both of our states. WVPB and WPLN are both part of a relatively new collaborative group of stations in our part of the South, sharing stories like this that pertain to all of our communities. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.